Hello and welcome. This is video number 1 in a 13-part series about World War II. In this opening video, the focus is going to be the events that represent the start of World War II, at least the point a lot of people look at as the beginning of World War II, September 1st, 1939, with Germany's invasion of Poland. So we'll talk about the events leading up to that invasion and then the early stages of the war up to the point where Germany was ready to invade France. Hope you find this helpful and informative. Here we go. So with where we left off with the Non-Aggression Pact that the Soviet Union and Germany had signed with each other, which was basically a 10-year agreement that the two countries wouldn't go to war with each other. That was the public part of the plan. The not public part of the plan was their, I guess you could say, secret plans to each seize some territory. Germany wanted to get into Poland, at least the western half of Poland. The Soviet Union would also gain access to a portion of Poland, which was a newly created country after World War I. And then also the countries of Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia, and Finland were areas that the Soviet Union was supposed to be able to gain access to. So the only thing that was in question getting into the late summer of 1939 was when exactly might the countries of Germany and the Soviet Union try to get those territories. Well, we'll end up finding out very quickly when that is actually going to take place. And it's at that point that most people usually identify the start of World War II. So again, what we're going to focus on today is the opening stages of what's normally identified as the beginning of World War II, and then that's all the farther we'll go with that. So to get things started, the date that is usually associated with the start of World War II is September 1st, 1939, and this is when Germany invades Poland. Now, up to this point, we have talked about Germany acquiring some territory, places like the Rhineland, Austria, the Sudetenland. One thing to keep in mind, though that was territory that Germany picked up, whether people within those territories necessarily liked it or not, Germany hadn't used force yet. They'd maybe used intimidation and maybe the threat of force, but they hadn't actually used their military yet to get the territory. That's one of the big things that changes with this invasion of Poland. This is not a matter of walking in and everybody bows down to them and now they have territory, but they used the military that they had been working on and building for the last several years. And one of the strategies that they use with Poland, and we'll see this again, especially early in the war, is a new strategy that they tried called the Blitzkrieg strategy. If you translate it out, it refers to lightning war, which basically meant that they were going to try to send what they had at their enemy, in this case Poland, to such a degree that the enemy would be overwhelmed and quickly surrender. So they sent their Luftwaffe, or their planes, or their Air Force, their Panzer divisions, which would be their tanks, their infantry, which would be the men on the ground, and basically just threw all they had at them very quickly, and in particular went after the capital city of Warsaw, all in the hopes that it would lead to a quick surrender. And in terms of how quick that happened, Poland would officially surrender to Germany 35 days after the attack began. Something that took place right after this invasion began were some final efforts from France and Great Britain to get Germany to not use war and to not move forward the way they clearly were ready to move forward. Unfortunately, the final pleas didn't do anything to deter Germany going after what they wanted, and as a result, France and Great Britain would declare war on Germany on September 3rd. Now, one thing that's important to note with that is just because they declared war on September 3rd didn't mean that those countries were necessarily ready to engage Germany in any meaningful way at this point. So it would be some time before France and Great Britain were actually ready to start fighting. But definitely by this point, it's clear World War II was underway. Now, something else to mention at this point, the Soviet Union would begin to go after some of the territory it was interested in. They would get started going after the eastern part of Poland on September 17th. So about halfway through the fight that Poland was up or against with Germany is when the Soviets also engaged them, which only made it that much more difficult for the Poles. And then Russia or Soviet Union would easily take Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania. They would have a harder time getting Finland. It would actually take almost half a year for the Soviet Union to actually subdue Finland. But eventually, both the Soviet Union and Germany would get the territories that they had talked about with their Non-Aggression Pact agreement. And at that point, they were, I guess you could say, satisfied with that territory that was in between the two of them, and only time would tell what would come next. And that was one of the maybe stranger parts of early in World War II, is about as quickly as everything began, it's like somebody hit the pause button. Once Germany had what it was interested in to its east, which was the western part of Poland, then it focused its attention west, basically turned to the west, and I think the expectation was that they were going to just keep right on going. But once they turned to the west and were ready, I guess you could say, to do whatever they wanted, then they just kind of sat there for a while. The side of England and France had mobilized for war. They were ready to go. They were sitting along a border area called the Maginot Line that we'll talk about more in tomorrow's lesson, and just simply ready. But nothing happened. And so through the rest of 1939 and into early 1940, basically nothing happened. Both sides were almost literally sitting there staring at each other, doing nothing. And nobody really could know what was going to happen next or when it was going to happen. So for a time, people referred to this as the phony war or the Sitzkrieg or sitting war because nothing was happening. And then, just like that, the pause button was pushed again and things started up again. And though I think a lot of people thought the next move for Germany was going to head towards France, that would have been somewhat consistent with what they had done with World War I. That's not what they did. I think in a lot of ways, what happened next represented maybe one of the smartest, from a strategic standpoint, moves that Germany would make in World War II, and that was to focus their attention to the north. If you think back to World War I, one of the things that would really end up hurting Germany is not really having access to the sea, having that cut off from them. And so one of the things that they were able to do by heading north next was secure some of those northern waterways. And so they went into Denmark, they went into Norway, and really quite easily were able to take those countries. Denmark actually surrendered in about 4 hours after the invasion into Denmark began. And I would imagine they could have put up more of a fight, but I think they recognized that they could put up a fight and lose and have a lot more people die and a lot more things destroyed, or they could simply give in and in a sense, kind of live to maybe resist in a different way on a different day. At any rate, Denmark surrendered very quickly. Norway put up a little bit of a fight, but ultimately had to surrender after about 2 months. So once Germany had this, they were able to establish some military bases in some very strategically valuable locations. And this would be something that would serve them well moving forward. Now, another big thing that took place about this time was a leadership change in England. The person we had talked about before as prime minister, which would really be the top leader in England, similar kind of position to, say, president in the United States. That person was Neville Chamberlain. That person had been prime minister for just a few years, most notable for what happened at the Munich conference and believing he had made a deal with Hitler that would prevent Hitler and Germany from using aggression. Obviously, with the way things were unfolding, getting into 1940, that effort failed badly, and as a result, he had pressure on him to step down, and he went ahead and resigned his position as prime minister. The person who was chosen to replace him was a person named Winston Churchill. This was a person that had a strong military background from the Navy. This was a person that really, through the 1930s, had spoken about the concern he had for Hitler and some of the things that were going on in Germany. So given what was going on by 1940, he was somebody that it seemed pretty clear had a good sense of what was going on and might be just the right person to lead England. And especially when we see him in action over the next few years, I think it's probably more true than not to say that at least what England does with World War II was made possible due to his leadership. It's hard to imagine Neville Chamberlain's leadership directing Great Britain in the same way. But anyway, Winston Churchill, new prime minister getting into 1940 for Great Britain, really a big deal moving forward. Now, the last thing I just want to mention, and this is where we'll leave it, is that once Germany had secured Scandinavia, that northern region, and established their strategic military bases, then they were ready to go after a very big and very significant target in France. Well, I hope this video has helped your understanding of the early stages of World War II. I hope you'll join me for the next video in the series when we talk about the German invasion of France. Thanks for watching.